Hello everyone, my name is Doodle and welcome to my channel Sleepy Panda, where I talk about true crime, paranormal stuff, and books. Well, actually I talk about whatever I want, but mostly those things. Anyway, today I'll be starting a video series about missing 411 cases. I say a new series because I plan to go through the list of missing 411 cases and cover 2 to 6 cases per video. The amount depends on how much there is to talk about per case. Anyway, let's get into the video. I would also like to say that the contents of this video at times can be sensitive, and it can involve stuff like sexual assault, murder, and the disappearances of people. And while I'm gonna do my best to not graphically describe bodies or any events that have happened, just please be aware of that. I'll have timestamps in the description as well of whatever sensitive information they might have. So yeah, but please take care of yourself first and watch YouTube videos later. I should probably start by defining what a missing 411 case is, because not every strange disappearance is a missing 411 case. Missing 411 cases must fit the following criteria. The disappearance happens in a national park, rural area, or large reserve of public land. There are exceptionally odd circumstances around this disappearance. This eliminates cases where the following is true: suicide, intentional disappearance, like someone trying to escape an abusive relationship who does not want their abuser to be able to find them, or someone running from the law. A case in which foul play is clear, even if the culprit is not able to be identified, like a person who is clearly murdered being found, even if the culprit cannot be identified. Strange weather conditions, like a flood that can account for large distances in between where they disappeared and where they were found. For example, if there's a flash flood and someone drowns, their body might be found way farther away from where they disappeared than would normally be a thing. Of course, there is some gray area here because we have to be reasonable with how far a flood could carry somebody. Anyway, known animal attacks, like someone running from a bear, tripping and hitting their head or dying, or maybe getting lost when they're running from a bear. There are also some commonalities to these cases, while not required for a missing 411 case, seem to happen a lot in them. These are the following. The missing person is often a child or elderly. The body is often found years later, if found at all. There's often evidence of them being alive long after they disappear, like remains of food, abandoned supplies, fire remnants, etc. The body is often found in an area in or near the search party's perimeter, after the search party has already searched that area. Oftentimes, the person was found miles away from the place where they went missing, even if it's practically impossible. In cases where an animal might be the cause, little to no forensic evidence of animals can be found, and what can be found is easily explained by the surrounding area. A branch off of this is people not reporting seeing a large animal in the area when the person disappears. Often, the missing person is an experienced hiker or explorer, or they know the area very well, making them getting lost and dying as a result improbable. Often there is evidence of paradoxical undressing. This is when, in extreme climates of hot and cold, people start to strangely undress. Often the person's body is found either posed or scattered around. There was one case, I can't remember the case name, where a man's jeans were found sitting near a river with his socks tucked in and his foot bones inside the socks, while the rest of his body was found in another location. Search dogs often have a hard time picking up a scent. There seems to be a higher rate of people with German ancestry involved, but I don't know what that would be about. But anyway, the person is often found at higher levels of elevation, like mountain peaks. And after the person goes missing, the weather forecast takes a drastic change. During these events, like after a person goes missing, there seems to be a higher rate of plane crashes. Due to the fact that most of the remains are skeletal, it can make it difficult to identify the cause of death. While we can identify many things from skeletal remains, cause of death can be difficult unless there's damage to the bones, such as a cracked skull or a cut that goes deep enough to fracture a bone. Bone forensics is actually really interesting, so let me know if you want me to do a video on that. For example, there was one kid who saw a big kitty found him, which led people to theorize that it might have been a big cat that had recently lost its cubs and adopted him, and that's how he got lost. So now that we know that, let's get into some cases. I'd like to make a final disclaimer. Some of these cases are not missing 411 cases, but they're very similar, and I find them interesting, and they happen in the Yosemite National Park, and that's the area for this video. So I want to talk about them. I'm going to make sure I'm clear as when they are or are not a missing 411 case, but just want to say that. I will also explain why they're not a missing 411 case. Additionally, I don't want this to come off as if I'm making fun of anyone or disrespecting the families of or the people who were lost. I just want to bring their cases to light so that maybe information related to these people might be found or discovered. I'll be putting links to the Cold Case Fund in the description, so if you can, please consider donating money to that. I'll also be putting some other links for missing persons resources as well. So the first case I would like to talk about is the case of Stacey Ann Arras. On the 25th of July, 1981, Stacey Ann Arras and her father went on a horseback riding trip as part of a larger group. After riding for about 3 hours, the group stopped at a group of cabins at Sunrise High Sierra Camp. The group planned to stay the night. Sunrise Camp is located 9,400 feet above sea level and is the last camp on the 50-mile High Sierra Camp loop. Stacey got cleaned up after the horse ride and decided to go on a walk. The path of this walk brought her near a boulder where a man named Gerald Stewart, who was 70 to 77 years old, sat. I couldn't find his exact age, it just said 70 to 77, so I don't really know why they couldn't find his exact age, but yeah. Anyway, Stacey informed her father of her plan and left. She had asked her father if he wanted to accompany her, but he declined. Their last conversation was about footwear, specifically Stacey's, and how she should change her flip-flops for hiking boots. The group said they saw her walk past the boulder with Gerald. She informed Gerald that she was planning to take a walk to a lake nearby with the intention of taking some pictures. This was according to Gerald, of course. There were two walking options, a longer and a shorter one. Stacey's plan was unclear. Gerald offered to accompany Stacey on her walk. After a while, Gerald got tired and sat down while Stacey continued. The rest of the group saw him sit down from their elevated position, which means we know he was not responsible for her disappearance. They all saw her go towards the lake by herself. They saw her go a little farther into some trees, and then she was never seen again. After a while, Stacey didn't return, so Gerald went back to the cabins and told the group, who gathered into a search party. They had no luck and decided to report her missing. Gerald informed the park rangers that he had talked to a group coming from the direction. Stacey went in, but they didn't see her. Stacey was last seen wearing an off-white pullover, gray hiking boots, and a white jersey blouse, leggings, and she also had braces. The official search group included 100 to 150 people, including 67 Mountain Rescue Association volunteers, people who knew how to look for missing people. They also deployed sniffer dogs to try and track her scent for over 10 days, focusing on the 3 to 5 square mile area around Sunrise Lake. 3 helicopters were used, with the park's own helicopter in the air for a total of 40 hours. The only thing they ever found was her lens cap, just inside the tree line where she was last seen. Because she had metal braces on her teeth, her skeleton would be easier to find. Unfortunately, as of recording this in 2022, it has not been found. Neither of her camera, her clothing, or Stacey. The lead theory is abduction, seeing as there were no signs of an animal attack or her camera, which a normal person would have dropped. Also, because of the close proximity of her lens cap to the hiking trail, it is very unlikely for her to have gotten lost. Stacey was reported as having... Okay, so this thing doesn't really make sense, because if you're getting abducted, you're probably going to drop your camera. And there are no signs of struggle. So it doesn't make sense for her to have been abducted. Stacey was reported as having some family and school trouble and was missing her boyfriend, but running away would not make sense, considering she was planning on wearing flip-flops on her walk. Stacey wasn't a dumb girl, and she would have had to change out of her riding shoes to be wearing flip-flops, as any reasonable stable wouldn't allow you to ride a horse in open-toed shoes. They wouldn't even let you into the stable area with open-toed shoes. That's a great way to break your feet. Besides, if she was planning on running away, wouldn't she have left a note or not invited her father on the walk? Park spokeswoman Linda Abbott said if she had planned on walking off, she wouldn't have gone off in thongs. By the way, thongs are the term for the type of sandal she was wearing. Also, she was only 14, and while middle schoolers tend to think of their dating partners as their entire world, I don't think most of them would go so far as to run away, nor do I think they would be good enough at running away to avoid all of those people looking for them. And remember, sniffer dogs couldn't pick up a scent of her. Also, National Park Service Superintendent Robert O. Beinwise said, just seems to have disappeared in regards to Stacey's disappearance. As far as I could find, there weren't any suspects. While Gerald was the last person to see her, there were also several witnesses stating that he didn't follow her and saw him sitting at the boulder by himself. And remember, he was an elderly man, 70 to 77. And while I'm not saying elderly people cannot be physically strong, I think in a fight, a 14-year-old young girl is probably going to be able to beat an old 77-year-old man. The problem with her being abducted was that there was no signs of struggle, and like I said, Stacy wasn't stupid. She wouldn't have gone off with a stranger in the forest. Also, Gerald and the other parts of the group, as well as the group Gerald saw coming back, were nearby, so they would have likely heard something if there was a struggle. To make this case even stranger, Yosemite National Park has refused to release the file regarding this case. Here's a quote from David Paulides, the author of the book series Missing 411, a series about missing cases. Quote, "So there is essentially nothing about that case for 25-30 years. I made a request on it through Yosemite for the Freedom of Information Act to get a copy on the report. A special agent for the Park Service named Yu called me and asked me why I wanted the report. And I explained that we were doing some research on search and rescue, and we were specifically looking into people who disappeared at Yosemite, and we wanted to see what in the report that was there. And he said there was nothing there. And I said, well, are there any suspects? Is it a criminal case? He said, nope, it's a missing persons case. I said, has anyone looked into it in the past 10 to 20 years? He said, not that I can think of. And I said, so there's no suspects, there's no work done on the case, she hasn't been found. Correct. And I said, okay, well, could you send me a copy of the case? And he said, nope. I said, why not? He says, because it's an open case and you'll never see it. And I said, but we've got dozens and dozens of missing persons cases from the Park Service. Why not this case? He goes, you'll never see it. And I said, what do you mean I'm not going to get it? It's an open missing persons case. Any criminal elements? Nope. I said, are there any suspects? Nope. Well, why won't you give it to me then? And he says, well, we never give away these cases. I said, wait a minute, I have dozens and dozens of these cases from your agency all over the U.S. He said, no, you don't. I said, yes, I do. And we get into this talk. He challenges me, he's rude, he says right from the get-go, I'm never going to get this. And so far, he's right. And we got off the phone. I went to my local congressman, Ian Campbell. I appealed through him. His representative in Washington, D.C. went and met with the representative for the Department of the Interior, and I got an answer back saying they won't release the case. The family of Stacy got a hold of me. They publicly asked for the case. It was denied. They made an appeal through the Park Service so the family could read the case, and this has dragged on, I think, for 2 or 3 years, and they still haven't seen the case. So what happened to Stacy? Don't really know, but according to the Freedom of Information Act and what the law is intended to do, it gives us access to information that our government has. This isn't a criminal case. There are no suspects. There's no crime that is thought to have occurred. Nobody can explain to me or the family why we can't see the case." End quote. As of July 14th, 2022, Miss Stacy Ann Aris is still missing without a trace, besides her lens cap. Our next case is a little confusing to research because somehow there happens to have been 2 people under the same name who went missing in about the same place, which is kind of weird to me, but whatever. Anyway, Jeff Estes is the name shared by 2 men, one who went missing in 1976 and one who went missing in 2018. Right now I'll be talking about the Jeff Estes who went missing in 1976. Jeff Estes went on a hiking trip in Yosemite National Park. He was planning on a solo hike where he planned on staying the night at May Lake. According to his friends, his plan was to hike back along the Snow Creek Trail, but he never returned. He was reported missing on the 24th of May, 1976. His body has never been found, and we really don't have anything to add to this. He was only 25 and seemed to know what he was doing. While it was possible he was injured and died out there, he likely would have been found before that could happen, and because he was staying along a well-known trail, it's hard to believe that he got lost. And while he was planning a solo hike, he also seemed to have some familiarity with the area. I know that it's easy to think that a lot of people who go on these hiking trips are just overconfident and just get lost, but that's really not the case. That does happen sometimes, but a lot of people who go on solo hikes do so because they understand how to hike and understand the area, not because they're stupid. So he seemed to know what he was doing. And as of July 14th, 2022, Mr. Jeff Estes is still missing without a trace. Kieran Burke was a 44-year-old man from Dublin, Ireland, who came to San Francisco for a 2-week vacation in 2000 in April. He booked a room for the 4th through the 6th of April near Yosemite at Curry Village, a hotel near Yosemite. He was last seen on the 5th at said hotel before he vanished without a trace. Burke left his rental car in the parking lot, and when, on the 6th, he failed to check out, the park staff informed the authorities. It is reported that he left for a hike on the 5th wearing a brown leather jacket. What is very strange about his disappearance is that he was reportedly an experienced hiker and even hiked the Himalayas. I don't know if you know this, but the Himalayas are very dangerous to hike, especially if you're inexperienced, which he was not. So the fact that he could do that, but then he went on a hike in Yosemite and just went missing, is very strange. According to his family, he was also a photographer who often took pictures of and from hiking trails and mountains, which means he had experience perhaps stepping off the path a little to get a good shot and stepping back on it, finding his way back to the trail. Unfortunately, no one had any idea where he went, and when the park spokesperson asked for anyone who might have actually caught him in the background of one of their photos or videos to come forward, no one did. It was eventually determined that he must have gotten lost or injured while walking along the trails in the park. While Mr. Burke was not as familiar with this area, he was still an experienced hiker, and like I said, he climbed the Himalayas, so this just doesn't sound plausible to me. As of July 14th, 2022, Mr. Kieran Burke is still missing without a trace. While Sandra Johnson Hughes did not go missing in Yosemite Park, she went missing in a national forest less than 10 miles away, so she's often placed in the Yosemite Park cluster, and so I'm going to include it in this video. Hughes moved from Hawaii to California in June of 2020 and planned to go on a solo camping trip, partially to escape the risk of a COVID infection. She was trained as a park ranger and was apparently an experienced hiker, which would make sense for someone who's trained as a park ranger. The last time she contacted her family was on the 26th of June, 2020. Once she didn't check back in with anyone for a while, she was reported missing. Madera County Sheriff asked for the public's help in searching for her, as is common with missing person searches. Her campsite was located near Johnson Meadow on the 5th of July, on Facebook, her niece Ashley Marcus wrote that, quote, "The campsite found in the Johnson Meadows area between Beesore and Minaret Roads with her belongings was quite disheveled, things thrown about all over, almost as if her car and belongings had been emptied carelessly." Ashley would also say that this was very strange for her aunt, as quoted, "She would never leave her campsite a mess. Even a piece of litter on the ground would bother her." Ashley also said that she was always very organized. "We do have reports of her being spotted on the 4th of July with bare feet and bruises on her face. The people who saw her reportedly offered help, but she declined." On the 5th, north of her campsite, the authorities located Hughes' car in the Chiquito Creek. They determined that it crashed into a tree at a speed of less than 20 miles per hour and subsequently rolled into the creek. This could explain her bruises, but not her bare feet or the fact that she declined help. Also, if she crashed into a tree at the speed of less than 20 miles per hour, her car would not have been totaled, and it's not likely she couldn't have at least tried to back up and get help. While crashing your car into a tree is probably not something that I would recommend, especially if you want your car to be usable, 20 miles per hour is not, while fast is not that fast when it comes to physics and braking cars. So while the front part of the car, the bumper and the front part are meant to crumple to absorb impact, it's not going to damage the engine irrevocably. So I find it strange that she just abandoned her car. Anyway, people began frantically searching the nearby area with officers and volunteers from more than half a dozen sheriff counties coming in to help. They even used sniffer dogs, and the California Air National Guard did an aerial search. Still, Hughes was not found. We suspect Hughes was alive till at least the 9th of August, as 2 hunters saw a woman leaning against a tree by the Chiquito Creek where her car was last seen. According to them, she did not seem distressed and did not attempt to contact them. They later recognized her from a missing flyer and reported her. No sign of her has been seen since. Hopefully she is still alive. As of July 14th, 2022, Miss Hughes is still missing. So this next one is not a missing 411 case, but I wanted to include it because I thought it was very interesting. Evelyn Consuela Roman was found on the 19th of October, 1968. The 24-year-old was found 200 feet away from the base of Nevada Falls, which is 594 feet tall. Rosamond had left 3 days before this for a solo hike. Rosamond's torn-up corduroy pants were pulled down to her ankles and her sweater was pulled up over her head. The autopsy later confirmed the belief that she was sexually assaulted. However, they were unable to determine if it was before or after she died. Her other sweater was found by a rock nearby and her purse on the bridge above the falls. The investigation said that she had, quote, been launched, end quote, from the cliff, as they determined she hadn't fallen or jumped. It was determined that the cause of death was massive head injury. Bits of her brain were found on rocks 50 feet away. Many questions about this case are left unanswered. Who killed her? Did Rosemary fall off the cliff trying to run from her attacker, or was she pushed? Did the attacker violate her before or after? Was it possible that her death was an unintentional consequence of her assault, with her attacker planning on leaving her traumatized but alive, only for her to run away from the person and fall off the cliff? There are so many more questions, but I'm trying to keep this a moderately length video, and we don't have the answers for them, so there really isn't a point in asking. Unfortunately, because this case was from so long ago, almost 60 years, we probably won't ever get answers, and forensic technology back then was better, but not the best, and it seems unlikely that Evelyn will ever receive justice. The reason why this is not a missing 411 case is because the idea that she was murdered is very plausible likelihood. I thought this case was fascinating, however, and wanted to share it with you. This next one is also not a missing 411 case, but is still a disturbing case that happened in Yosemite Park, and is doubly disturbing because of the experience the killer's brother also went through. The family's history became known as the Two Faces of Evil, and you will soon see why. 42-year-old Carol Sund took her 15-year-old daughter, Julie, and Silvina Peloso, age 16, on a hiking and camping trip on the 12th of February 1999. Carol rented a red Pontiac, and they started to head towards Cedar Lodge, where they planned to stay for a few days. By the way, Silvina was an exchange student from Argentina, and Jen, Carol's husband, was unable to accompany them on this trip, which is why the three of them left alone. After a hiking trip on the 14th, the women went and grabbed some DVDs to watch from the hotel desk. This was the last time they were ever seen alive. The room staff said when they did not clean the room the next morning, when they cleaned the room the next morning, there weren't any signs of foul play. Nothing was unusually messy, it did not look like a struggle had taken place, and for all intents and purposes, it looked like the group had just left for another hiking trip. The group had also apparently checked out beforehand and left their key cards at the front desk. Jens was planning on meeting up with the woman at the San Francisco airport. Their plan was to travel together to Arizona, and while Jens would go to a meeting, the woman would tour the Grand Canyon. When Mrs. Sutton didn't arrive, Jens wasn't too suspicious. He just assumed that his wife had flown along early instead. Remember, this was in the late 90s, and flying wasn't as excruciating then as it is now. I mean, it was still a pain in the butt, but it wasn't as difficult. Jens tried to call his wife, but was unable to reach her or anyone else in the group. The next day he tried again and reported them missing when he could not reach them. The rental company confirmed that Carol had never returned her car, which makes Jen's already unlikely theory of her traveling ahead completely implausible. The police and park rangers had begun combing the woods. There are several methods for looking for people and the most common for missing but assumed alive people is a grid method, where you divide the area you're searching into a grid and have search parties assigned to each grid square. That's the method that they used. For 4 weeks, police, volunteers, and park rangers searched for the car and the women employing helicopters, skis, and good old-fashioned walking to complete this task. When Carol's wallet showed up in Modesto with its credit cards and money, the police and FBI knew something was really wrong. Modesto, for reference, is 1,982 miles from Yosemite, if you're assuming they are at the very edge of the Yosemite National Park. FBI agent Nick Rossi, and I have no idea what's with that in Criminal Minds. I think that's just a coincidence. Anyway, he said, quote, "At this point, we have not yet uncovered evidence to allow us to determine conclusively whether this was a tragic accident or criminal act," end quote, on the 26th of February. Then 2 weeks later, Agent James Maddock, who is now placed in charge of the case, stated, quote, "We feel almost certain that the women were victims of a violent crime," end quote. By the way, the reason why they said almost certain is because agents aren't allowed to ever make a statement that implies 100% certainty unless they have absolute evidence for the case. For example, unless they have a positively identified body, they cannot say that a person is murdered. They can say, "We believe this person has been murdered," but they can't say this person has been murdered or this person is dead. After the FBI announced that this case was no longer a missing persons case, but now a triple homicide case, and them digging through more than 1,000 leads, they still had nothing. Unofficially, Jen Sund offered up a reward for $250,000 for information on the disappearance of his wife, daughter, and the exchange student. He eventually increased the amount to 300,000 and even appeared on Good Morning America, where he made an impassioned pleas for the American public for help in locating the missing women, begging for any information regarding their disappearance and assumed murders. To add to the tragedy of this, Carol and Jens had other children. They had to go through losing their mother, their sister, and this exchange student who they'd probably grown to care about like a sister as well. I'll read you a quote from Gina, who was age 13. "I try to stay strong because I know that's what you'd want your baby to be, but Mommy, I don't want you to leave me." On March 18th, a hiker stumbled upon a car matching the description of the missing vehicle, hidden off Highway 108 in Stanislaus Forest. Agents arrived on the 19th, and after examination, 2 charred bodies were found in the trunk. By dental records, the bodies were identified as Carol Sund and Silvina Peloso. On the 25th, Julia's body was also found, badly decomposed, with a slit throat near Lake Pedro. The FBI made several arrests, including known sex offenders, drug users, and ex-convicts. Michael Mick Lorick, a known drug user, was arrested, as well as his half-brother Eugene Rufus Dykes. They were both found not guilty. 2 others were arrested on suspicion and later released were Billy Joel Strange and Daryl Gary Stephens. There were also some others who were suspected but not arrested, including Rachel Lou Campbell, Derry Dwayne Utley, Teresa K. Gray, Kenneth Soldier Stewart, what a strange nickname, Angela Dale, Maria Ledbetter, and Jeffrey Wayne Knight. But I also said there was someone named Joey Ruth Armstrong when I introduced this case. So, who is she? Well, Joey was the final victim of this murder before the murderer was caught. 26-year-old Joey Ruth Armstrong was found decapitated beyond a campground near the residence inside the park on the 22nd of July, 1999. By the way, Armstrong worked with the park and had worked on education programs. It was believed that she was murdered on the day before being discovered on the 21st. When Chief James Maddock was questioned as to whether or not he felt the FBI could have done more to prevent her murder after the fact, he responded with, quote, "I've struggled with that issue for the last 24 hours and continue to do so. I'm confident we've done everything that could be reasonably done," end quote. Now that we know who all the victims were who killed them. Carrie Stainer, that's who. If you're into true crime, specifically abductions, you might recognize the last name. I'll talk about that later. 37-year-old Stainer was working as a handyman for the hotel where the Sund woman and Peloso were staying, and no link between him and the crime was found. At the time, it was treated more as a routine questioning, not anything too serious. And if you don't know, it's standard procedure to question as many people as possible after a crime happens. You never know what might become relevant later on, and the sooner you question people, the more reliable their testimonies are. Of course, there is some boundaries to this, as you don't want to be questioning so many people that your timeline gets muddy. But if he was working at the hotel, it's reasonable to ask him if he had any interactions with these women, so that's why they interviewed him. But now there was actually evidence for Stainer being guilty. After his initial arrest and questioning, Special Agent Maddox stated that, "During the last 24 hours, we have developed specific information linking Stainer, also, to the Sund Peloso murders." End quote. Stainer had been told not to leave the area, but what does a stupid, guilty person do when they realize the FBI has solid evidence of their guilt in a quadruple homicide? They run. Stainer was found in a nudist colony that he frequented. The manager said the colony recognized Stainer from the FBI wanted persons announcement and reported him. Could you imagine just getting arrested, being totally nude or whatever because there's a nudist colony and the FBI agents are there to arrest a serial killer and just being extremely uncomfortable surrounded by naked people arresting a naked man? That would make me rethink all of my life choices. So when they were driving back, Stainer confessed to the crimes. When news later reported on the case, he said to them, "I am sorry their loved ones were where they were when they were. I wish I could have controlled myself and not done what I did." Well, sorry, buddy, but you still did what you did, and that doesn't absolve you of your guilt. Stainer explained the details of how he killed the women and stated that he never sexually assaulted any of them. He also stated that he fantasized about killing women for the past 30 years, since he was 7. Stainer said that even though he got away with the prior murders, he couldn't resist the urge to kill Armstrong after striking up a conversation with her. The FBI stated that his confession revealed details that, quote, Only the killer would know in such specificity that agents were able to recover evidence confirming his confession. Knives were used in the slayings, and the weapon suspected in Miss Armstrong's death was recovered. End quote. So what was the evidence that led the police to arrest him in the case of Armstrong in the first place? Well, both the FBI and local investigators collected samples of trace evidence. This means small evidence like hair fibers and and like clothes fibers and stuff like that, of potential interest from room 509, the room where Stainer sexually assaulted both of the young girls before murdering Carol and Sylvania. After killing Carol and Sylvania, Stainer took Julie to the lake where her body was found and murdered her shortly after. Vacuum sweepings were taken from room 509, and his hair was identified in it. They also found possible body fluid stains on a blanket, as well as a latent handprint. A latent hand or fingerprint just refers to prints that are typically visible to the naked human eye, left by natural oil formed on someone's palm. It's basically a finger or hand print. Vacuum sweepings from inside Jolie's home yielded hair evidence as well. This was the home that Stainer claimed to have bound Jolie with duct tape in. There's also a stain that was suspected to be bodily fluid found on a blanket inside Jolie's home. The FBI also found clothes stained with Jolie's blood. Latent fingerprints were also lifted from the inside of Jolie's truck, which Stainer said he had touched when interacting with Jolie. This might not sound like a lot of evidence, but it serves to corroborate Stainer's statement and confirms the suspicion of the police already had. Plus, this kind of forensic evidence is enough to arrest someone on, and then the guy goes and runs away and then confesses. So it seems pretty cut and clear. Stainer was eventually given the death penalty after describing to the court in gruesome detail how he raped Sylvina in the bathtub multiple times before killing her, and then again describing gruesomely how he raped Julie several times before slitting her throat. He's currently sitting on death row waiting for his punishment. So much for never having sexually assaulted the girls. But I also promised you I would talk about his brother, and I will. For the sake of time, I'll be doing a very brief summary, but I'm also planning on making a video on missing cases that resolved in the people being found alive, because I think it's important to talk about the good things, the cases that are successful, where we get these people back instead of just a body to bury. I'll also be talking about Stephen Stainer in more detail there. For now, let me give you a summary. Stephen Stainer was abducted and molested and raped by a pedophile for 8 years of his life, being kidnapped at the age of 7 in 1972. His abductor even enrolled him in school under a fake name, and no one seemed any the wiser. He even had girlfriends during the time. Parnell, his offender, realized that as Stephen got older, he would be harder to control, so Parnell decided to kidnap another child, Timothy White. Stephen knew he could not watch another child go through what he went through, and waited until Parnell left for work and escaped the house, hitchhiking to Ukiah, California, where they went to the police. Parnell was convicted of kidnapping and false imprisonment and sentenced to 7 years in jail, but only served 5. He continued abusing children until he was caught again in 2004, when he was sentenced to 25 years in jail. He died in 2008 at the age of 76. Carol Lawlin was a 19-year-old girl working at the Curry Village gift shop in Yosemite National Park in 1976, when she straight up vanished. It wasn't until 1980 1 year later when her body would be found. On April 28, 1980, 2 climbers were descending Castandia Wall in the Cookie, an area of Yosemite National Park known for crack climbing. By the way, crack climbing is climbing along natural crevices and cliff faces and whatnot, not whatever you might have been thinking it was. I certainly thought it was something else. Anyway, Lawlin's body was found scattered 400 feet below the longest tunnel on the road. Rangers found her bones scattered in a 15-foot radius along with beer cans and other trash. Carol's father, Austin Lawlin, said the authorities told him there was no way his daughter could have fallen. She had to have been pushed or otherwise coerced. One of the largest suspects in the case was the trailside killer, real name David Joseph Carpenter. Carpenter was known for stalking his victims before killing them in national parks. He killed at least 10 people with a .38 caliber for all but one killing, the other being committed with a .44 caliber. I could not find her cause of death, however, I think it's safe to assume that because her remains were skeletal, they were unable to identify what it was. Anyway, the theory was that Carpenter killed her and dropped her remains off the 400-foot cliff. Problem with the idea is that while Carpenter did indeed work as a traveling salesman that supplied Yosemite gift shops, records show he did not join the firm until 2 months after Lawland disappeared. That doesn't fit the way he operates, and while he could have stepped outside the norm, that just normally isn't what we see in serial offenders like Carpenter. So yeah, it doesn't fit the way he operates. He didn't have a legitimate way to support himself and stalk her at the same time, so the idea that he killed her is highly unlikely. According to the supervisor of the store where Carrie worked, Larry Lopez, Carpenter never actually visited the store but did call a few times. This does not mean he couldn't have been stalking her, but most stalkers try and at least make contact with their victim. Something that I find weird as well is they said her bones were scattered around. If someone falls from a cliff, they're not going to break apart like they're in a Lego video game, okay? Like, maybe a little bit, I don't know. But people aren't Lego pieces. There would be trauma to the body, but I feel like it'd be kind of strange for the person to just, like, explode everywhere, you know? Does that make any sense? I don't know. Maybe I'm just completely wrong in my thinking, but that feels a little strange to me. What really happened to Carol will probably forever remain a mystery, sadly. On the 17th of September, 2016, Peter Jackson, no, not that Peter Jackson, you know he's not missing, texted his son to inform him that he was planning on going to Yosemite National Park. His campsite, White Wolf Campsite number 58, was paid for until the 21st. His car was found at the campsite. Jackson was known to do somewhat difficult hikes of about 5 miles, so it wasn't like he didn't know anything at all about camping or hiking. It was believed that he left for a day hike, but his intended destination was unknown. Jackson was 74 at the time, which, like, dude, if you're doing difficult 5-mile hikes in your 70s, like, I am impressed, okay? Just saying. Jackson is known to be in good physical condition and not have any health conditions. He had on a royal blue outdoor products backpack with him when he left. In 2019, his backpack was found between Aspen Valley and Smith Park, 3 years after he went missing. No one knows anything else about him or why he disappeared. As of recording this, Mr. Jackson is still missing. Hopefully he will be found. If you have any information, please let the park hotline know. 25-year-old Timothy Barnes went on a hike to the Polydome Lakes about 3 miles away from his campsite on the 5th of July, 1988. He was never seen again. Barnes was supposed to return later in the day, so his friends reported him missing. Barnes had a pin in his left ankle and was known to smoke cigarettes. As of writing this, nothing else is known about his disappearance. Also, not really related, but whenever I went to research him, there was very limited information on anything about him. There was on average a single paragraph about him, a majority of it being basic information about what he was wearing, or it was like, oh, so-and-so person was seen wearing such and such thing, and disappeared on this day at this location. Like, that was the majority of the paragraph. Nothing else was about him. And that is all the information about this case that I could find. It's very bizarre to me. As of recording this, Mr. Barnes is still missing, but hopefully he will be found alive, or his family can at least have his body to bury and to bring them some semblance of peace and closure. And that's the end of this video. Thank you so much for listening or watching or whatever, however you pay attention to YouTube. I listen to it in the background. If you like this video, please let me know in the comments down below and give me a like. And if you like the kind of things I talk about, please think about subscribing, as it really helps me out and motivates me to do a lot more of these videos, and I really appreciate it. I know this video is a bit shorter than what I normally do, but I've been working on a cult iceberg video, and it's been sucking up a lot of my time, and I wanted to just get something out here so that, like, anyone who follows my channel, I know my channel is pretty small, but anyone who is following it might just have something. Also, I just think these are pretty interesting to talk about, so let me know, so I know if I should keep making more missing 411 and just missing person cases in general. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!